Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Good morning, my friends and fellow elite achievers. Welcome to Modern Leadership, the podcast where each week we sit down with authors, entrepreneurs, and leaders to explore their journey, diving into the ups, their downs, and ultimately the lessons they learned along the way. Our goal, of course, is to show that everything is figure-outable. And today's guest expert is Derek O'Carroll. When Derek joined Brightpearl 3 years ago as CEO, he took on the biggest risk any leader can take, a turnaround. Since then, Derek has led the retail operations platform from stagnant to more than $12 million in revenue, nearly 1,400 customers worldwide, and managing more than $3 billion in orders. Shortlisted for CEO of the Year at the Digital Masters Awards in 2018, his specialties include building exceptional teams, creating winning environments, simple messaging, zero ambiguity, and of course, training for excellence. Today, he is our modern leadership guest expert. Derek, how are you?
I am excellent. Thanks very much for that glowing review.
It's terrific to have you on the show. I want to jump into all of this stuff that we just talked about in that review. But before we do, give us a little background. Tell us, who are you as an individual?
Well, born in Dublin in the late 60s, trained as a chemist. Wasn't a very good chemist, I think. Met a techie in the 90s who was showing me a early black and white web page out of CERN. And there we had it. We did our first startup, which was a sort of advertising agency building websites in Dublin, Ireland. And then went from there through the 90s and did a bunch of startups, had my successes and also had my failures. Then I had kids and my wife said, please, no more startups. And then we got bought by a large corporate company called Symantec, on the last project. And that would coincided with my daughter Lyra being born. And I thought I wouldn't last long in a large corporate because I'm sort of a startup guy. But what I found out was that they wanted me to participate as a sort of landing and launch pad for their acquisitions. And I thought that was interesting because I always wanted to understand how to compete against bigger companies when you've got limited resources. I think that's a very interesting area, always has been, so it was appealed to me. And I used to almost resign every 2 years and they'd give me another project and I'd learn more. And I found out, on my 10th anniversary, I was still there. And I went from running one division up to my last gig was running sales and marketing globally for Norton, the global antivirus brand. And before that, I was sent to Germany, of all places. I don't even speak German, but they sent me over there to do a restructuring in Germany of a business that was about $500 million. And then on my 10th anniversary, I said to my wife, I really got to get back to the real world. It's been fun. I've learned a lot. And then I bailed and I looked for a project, a turnaround, because I'm slightly mad. I must be.
You must be.
Which you were alluding to. Must be. Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure your listeners know all about that. But, I convinced myself that I was looking for a company that was positioned in a growth market that was going to go through massive disruption, and maybe a company that I could get in and fix some of the basics in order to extract value. So I was looking for a growth market, a company that was maybe had the wrong product market fit and also had a large customer base that I could potentially, the idea at the time was monetize and then use that to pay for a transition period and then get myself into a position where I could return value to the shareholders and the employees and the customers. And I found Brightpearl.
Well, that's perfect. And that catches us up to what we want to talk about in this episode, which is Brightpearl. But we have to go back a little bit because I want to ask you about your education as a chemist. And when you were sitting in those classes and you were learning about, putting different kinds of things together that most people wouldn't say relate very well to business, startup, this kind of stuff. What was going through your mind at that time? Where did you see yourself on a career trajectory or career path as you were studying chemistry?
Back in my early 20s, I was very concerned about the environment at the time. And I figured I didn't really know anything about it, but I wanted to learn what were the fundamentals of environmental change. And I figured out in my own sort of head that I would like to understand the building blocks of how to do things differently. And I was very interested in environmental science. And there wasn't any really good degrees around at the time. So the closest thing to do was applied chemistry. Sounds bizarre. But then I got into that and And that was my reason for doing applied chemistry. I thought that that was the best way to understand maybe different ways of doing things from an environmental perspective on the manufacturing side of the coin.
And I've been very fascinated with this kind of stuff, Derek, over time. Steve Jobs, when he talked in his commencement address at Stanford, he talked about connecting the dots looking backwards, right? And he talks about, going up to Reed College and dropping out and then dropping into the calligraphy class, and how that kind of put him on a trajectory that he could have never thought sitting back in those college classrooms. Hey, I'm going to own a movie company, Pixar, or I'm going to own an animation company, or I'm going to own Apple. I'm going to be the most valuable brand in the world. And so I want to take you back as you're thinking about this applied chemistry and your training, your original kind of trajectory in life. And now as you look back and connect those dots, how did they connect for you?
Are you talking about when I was at university and then what drove me to the next part of my career? Is that your question?
As listeners of this podcast, we have people that have dreams, they have goals, they're aspiring to a lot of terrific things. I find myself in this same group where, I don't know what the next 20 years is going to be, but I know that what I'm doing today is going to contribute to that. And 20 years down the road, I'm going to look back and I'm going to say, it was terrific that I ran the Modern Leadership Podcast because of XYZ. And here you are now, CEO of Brightpearl, a tremendous turnaround, very successful company after a very successful career at Symantec and through some other startups. And now as you look back, what are some of the things that maybe at the time you didn't know connected, but are connecting to get you to where you are today?
At a personal level, I think I was taught by my folks the importance of humility, but to balance that with curiosity, where I really sort of cut my teeth on understanding the difference between, when you're looking at a problem, that is, understanding the difference and having the curiosity to find a root cause as opposed to a symptom, which is usually the first thing that pops up. And that was a skill that I very much honed in my early days when I was doing applied chemistry. But it was the humility coupled with the curiosity, and the humility I got from my folks. And then the last part of it was I was incredibly driven. And the reason I was driven was I actually had a heart operation when I was a kid. And I spent 6 months in a bubble. And that really sort of gave me a keen appreciation of every hour in the day. And I was always very restless. I'm absolutely fine now, but I was always very restless as a kid to work, to find, to be curious. But my folks were great trainers in the importance of engaging with people equally in all regards. And those combinations, I think, when I look back and I think about what type of value I bring to companies and teams now, every company is a combination of the effort and the coalition of effort of the people. And those three attributes that I was introduced to, was taught by my parents, have given me a huge amount of impact and joy, actually, as I've gone through my career in the last 20 odd years.
And I find myself in agreement with you on this idea of root causes versus symptoms. And I want to have you talk to us a little bit about that, because I imagine as you went into Brightpearl, as you talk about startups, as you talk about turnarounds, as you talk about identifying opportunities, this has played out a lot in your life. So teach us a little bit about this idea of symptoms versus root causes.
Well, it first starts when you join a team which are underperforming. You know immediately that the people have a motivation challenge, an issue, obviously on day one, because they're not being successful. So, but that said, you'll usually find within a team that they will have the answer to the problem around the known barriers that they see exist within their business as they go and try and execute whatever strategy and plan. The individuals at the field, whether it's in ProServe, in engineering, in sales, whatever department, they usually have the answer. So the first thing I did was I spent 90 days of my time with board approval interviewing every single employee, a selection of partners, and obviously a selection of customers, small and large. And I had very distinct questions for each group, really helping me to understand, how did they organize their time, which was a key question. What made them feel successful when they went back home to these was the employee questions. What made them feel successful when they went back to their customers and spouses? How did decisions get made around them that impacted their time? And so on and so forth. So a lot of questions. And those questions allowed me to build up a picture of the barriers that each department was facing, but without the filter of management. So I went straight down to the individual contributors. And that allowed me to build up an issue list, if you like, which at the time was 42 strategic issues in the business, which sounds crazy. And obviously you can't fix 42 issues. But it was me spending the time to listen. And then I presented the findings back to the group in a all hands at 90 days. I think it was 60 days, actually. And I said, listen, I listened to you guys. You guys have the answer. Here's what you told me. Here's where the barriers are. What do you guys think? So that was phase one. And then I put together a strategy, which was really focused around some basic questions about, let's make sure we build a product that customers actually want. Sounds very basic, but it's amazing how many teams get that wrong. Let's ensure that we're very clear on the three things we're going to do better than anyone else, but that we're going to be recognized by our clients and our staff to be doing those things. And let's pick a leader in a market that we can go and attack. They may not be our competitor today, but they will be our competitor tomorrow if we execute that. And that was the foundation of our approach. And then we shared that with the team, and then that became a 3-year turnaround plan. And then the last point was to check the skills level and the execution level within the team. So I asked the group to select 10 of the issues. Not obviously, you can't solve 42 issues. So we picked 10 of the most critical ones. And then we simply asked the team to nominate themselves to continuous improvement teams around those 10 issues to go off and look at the problems, look at the data, find the symptoms, find the root cause, and propose solutions for then review by myself and other domain experts, which I would bring in from outside. And that did two things. One, it got everyone involved in the solution, irrespective of grade. But two, it created this coalition of effort, really all focused on trying to find the issues and the challenges and the solution. But most importantly, it actually allowed me to see who actually had the true skills within the organization. Because as you know, it's strategy, structure, people. And you usually find out very quickly you've got the wrong people in the wrong jobs. And by about day 120, we knew what we had to play with, and we had a strategy.
Well, I want to jump into that because as you talk about people, the first thought that comes to my mind is you're new on the team. You're the new guy, the outsider coming into a team that everybody else on the team had been around for some period of time, maybe some longer than others. And I would imagine that there was some upper management or maybe middle management, upper middle management people who felt like, hey, why didn't we hire from within? Why didn't we bring one of us, like me, for example, to the top of this food chain? Why bring somebody from the outside like Derek? And then when you bring forth your mission and your vision and you talk to the team, how did you handle some of those offshoots of people who said, that's not the way we do it around here. That's not what we've done for years. How did you handle keeping people accountable to that mission that you guys created?
Those people who identified themselves as being barriers to those projects that already everyone else had agreed was the way forward, and they had good data to prove that point. We essentially moved those people out of the business very quickly. And that was just a tactic that had to be executed within the first 6 months. So by month 1 to month 6, the executive team were gone with the exception of one individual. And most of the middle management were gone. And by the end of the year, we had replaced about 95% of the team in North America and about 55% of the team here in the UK. So it was a complete transition within the group over the first year. And the approach was obviously one-to-one conversations, but most importantly, as people nominated for projects, they were either approvers, contributors, decision makers, whatever the role was that they were nominating for. And you very quickly saw who had a high say-do ratio and who had which is obviously what you want, but also anyone who's doing the passive-aggressive sort of play and really trying to go outside the coalition of effort and disrupt for their own personal vainglory, we just removed really quickly.
And how did you deal with this concern that as you removed people, you were going to be removing maybe vendor relationships or customer relationships, relationships that they would have, and maybe taking on more and more responsibility as a leader yourself, as you talk about over, a 12-month period, losing a lot of your senior leadership, losing some of your middle management, maybe even most of your middle management. How did you deal with maintaining the relationships and the culture within the company with the vendors and the clients, customers?
Yeah, well, the first thing, two things that we set up was to manage everyone's expectations. When we finalized the path of change we were going to go through, and we got everyone agreed behind these projects and the strategy, we actually told them very openly that it was going to be very, very difficult, which is quite a strange thing to do. But I do believe I even used the term valley of death in the first all hands, which we talked about the strategy. And I said, we are going to go through a wall of pain, and it's going to be extremely difficult as we transition the organization to a new level of fitness. So that was one part of, and that obviously got everyone, the right-minded people with the right mindset, actually on side. So that then allowed me to see that there was a lot of managers who were actually individual contributors within a dysfunctional organization. You usually find the managers have lost, they just don't have sight of the way to go forward. They don't cooperate with each other, and there's no coalition of effort. And what I found in Brightpearl was a real true spirit within the individual contributors. And I got this through the personal interviews, where there was people who were individual contributors, but actually were the leaders of tribes within the company. And they were the people that ended up, there's three of them now who are senior leaders within the company. But at the time, they were individual contributors. One of them is a SVP within the company over in the States. And those tribal leaders were the ones that really allowed me to maintain the relationships you referred to, but most importantly, give me the coffee room chat and support for the valley of death that we talked about in year one. And then from a customer perspective, we were also very open with regard to the changes that we were going to be making to the product, because the customers knew that the company wasn't doing very well at that time. They're not daft. They knew it. And they were very happy with the increase in the communications that we gave to them. And we laid out exactly what we were going to do to the company. And that's pretty risky, because you're basically saying, this is what I'm going to do before you've done it. So then you have to prove very high execution, which I'm lucky to say we did. And then the other point was shareholders. We had a lot of, company, any of your listeners who are thinking of doing a turnaround, don't forget about the amount of work that you have to do with your shareholders and cleaning up the cap table and getting yourself into a position where your board are empowered to make the right decisions without having to serve with, notifications out to a bunch of family and friends, which is what I found in this company. So.
Yeah. And so now here we are, you're 3 years into it. You've grown the revenue, you've grown the customer base, you've grown the orders that are under management. You guys are doing a lot of great stuff. It's a new time. It's a new transition period for you. You're no longer this turnaround that's kind of cleaning house and figuring it out. What are you challenged with today, and where do you go from here?
Yeah, so actually, I'm jumping onto an all hands after this interview to talk about the end of the 3-year plan that we launched in January 2017, because that obviously needs to be reset in 2020. And back then, we said we were going to execute a strategy which would give us a foundation for growth and would make us a break-even company and would give us, all of the SaaS metrics would be green. And we've achieved that. But now what I'm working on with the leadership team, also with some key customers through a product advisory board and some advisors on the board, is we've built a foundation which is essentially a back office ERP for a sector called retail. And now we have a strategy which is all based on the standardization that you get in the world that we operate on, because we just serve one sector. And we have an amazing opportunity now to use the data that is created by our customers and provide benchmarking and threshold-based alerts back to those customers, which is a real differentiator in the market. So there's a lot more to that, but now we have a path which takes us from a foundational healthy business to a category leader. And what's more, I have a team now that trust each other and have a demonstrable track record of being able to execute. So we have a fitness level, which means that there's not too much of a gap between a CEO strategy, which can be interpreted as rhetoric if you have a low fitness level. We've got a very high fitness level in terms of execution. So we're ready to press the button on that exciting strategy, and we'll be launching that to the market and in January 2020.
We'll want to follow along with you on this, Derek, and see how this results for you and Brightpearl, because this is a fascinating time for you and for your company. Now, one of the things that makes you such a great CEO and a great guest on this podcast is your idea of simple messaging. And so in the little time that we have left, I want to shift gears now and talk about simple messaging and why that's such a leadership trait and something that you needed to bring Brightpearl to where they are today and where they're going tomorrow. Well,
at the heart of it, I'm a product company. We build a product that people use. But the way I look at it to derive simplification in terms of messaging is I ask customers about what are the jobs of work they hire us to do, i.e. our platform, and what is the personal benefit to them, either as a user or as a company. And by me, always, and it's all about quality repetition when you're looking for simplicity, and also when you're talking about what your messaging is. You need to be repetitive, but you need to have quality when you're actually distributing your message. But when you're looking for the message, I always go straight to the customer. So it's customer centric. Educate me about the jobs of work that you are using us for, and attach value to those jobs of work in terms of the time saved and the efficiency. Because in our market, merchants today, as your listeners know, it's all about minimizing negative customer reviews as they transact and sell product in all of the channels, physical and virtual, that you can do today. And the root cause of bad reviews is typically poor operational processes, people packing the wrong product or sending the wrong product. And that's what you address when you want to make sure that you don't score any own goals as a result of poor operational processes, which means people in the back office making errors and mistakes. And that scale, that's a killer. So I'm always asking questions, taking my shoes off and putting the shoes on of the customer. And that's the mindset that I take when I work with the teams. And I never go into meetings telling people what to do. I go into meetings asking questions, even obviously if I know the answer or I think I know the answer. And half the time I'm wrong, but just by answering the questions, I get to the right answer. And then the team come along with me.
Well, and this was a great example in a product-based business, but I think it translates well to a service-based business as well. Because in a service-based business, these bad reviews come through communication. They come through presentation. And that's the same thing you're talking about in the product business. It's how you present, how you face the customer and the experience that they have. At the end of the day, we are a review culture right now. I mean, everything is 5 stars, 3 stars, whatever it may be. We look to that as deciding factors. And so I think this simplification is such a great idea. Derek, now we need to change gears. I want to talk to you a little bit about learning from leaders. The 4 questions that we ask every leader. Are you ready?
I'm as ready as can be, sir.
Very nicely done. Okay, our first question then is the book currently on your Kindle or bedside table. What are you reading these days?
The Build Trap by Melissa Peer. It's about how to make sure that you build product that people actually want. And I'm doing that because I'm very involved in understanding the strategy for 2020.
And don't you think that's kind of a shift from, in the past, we built products and then we tried to convince consumers that they needed the product. And now I feel like we need to spend way more time understanding what our consumer wants, what they're looking for, and then adapt our products to meet their needs. How do we avoid falling into this trap, though, of just doing what everybody expects us to do and never really innovating?
So we do it because we serve one sector. We listen to the customers. We understand their business and the sector we serve, and then we innovate product that's going to hit the requirements of the biggest cohort across the customer representation. But then by doing that, we make sure that the teams have time to then go off and do hackathons and actually think about the innovation part that goes on top. But you've got to do the first part. And I'm in the B2B enterprise space, so back office. I'm not building consumer products where your paradigm probably exists there. But on the enterprise side, I have to go through and make sure my product serves the requirements of the largest cohort of potential customers. And then I have to always answer the question in every part of the product, what are the 3 things in this product that we're going to do better than anyone else? And that obviously is the area that we look for innovation from the teams.
Yeah, terrific. All right, our next question then is your leadership superpower.
I'm pretty good at finding root cause. So complex problems, working with people, asking questions. I'm pretty relentless about that. That's not a very exciting superpower, but and then helping people understand that and creating coalitions of effort without putting people under too much pressure, but where they can shine.
I actually think it's a very exciting superpower. For the listeners who have gone to the website, taken the Modern Leadership Superpower Assessment, they know that one of the 5 platforms of leadership that we lead from, one of the 5 is problem solving. And I heard problem solving in your leadership superpower. All right, our next question. A motivational quote, philosophy, or mantra, something that you live by.
When the sea goes out, you see who's swimming naked. It's a quote from Warren Buffett. And if you're in the turnaround world, people are the first area that you need to address, either on skills development or, to your earlier point, on transition. And I'm always reminded of that quote when I'm doing projects like this.
Yeah, I love it. All right, our final question then is the book that you most often gift or refer to friends, family, and colleagues.
When people ask me what books should they read to chill out and relax, I recommend the Northern Lights trilogy by Philip Pullman, which I think is it's a fantasy story written for sort of teenagers, but very applicable to the adult world. And it's a great take on modern life and organized religion. Really, really interesting trilogy. And he's just released 2 new books actually as well to carry it on, prequels. So Northern Lights, Philip Pullman.
Very nice. And we'll have to check that out because I believe that we need to spread a little bit of fiction to go along with our nonfiction reading and kind of allow ourselves to refresh and recoup and re-energize for the upcoming work.
I'm terrible for business books. I read them and then I go, please, you could have written that in 3 pages. You could have given me and it's painful. Whereas I've got a wife who's a ferocious reader and she goes, this book's good. This book's really good. But unfortunately, she doesn't read business books. So I'm out on that one.
Right. Well, we'll take those nonfiction or those fictional recommendations anytime. Derek, it's been a blast having you on the show. Before I let you go, there was one thing I wanted to ask you about. I want you to leave us with a story today. And we want to hear this story about when you were 15 years old and your school's unused tennis court.
That was my first entrepreneurial. I went to a school called Turner College in Dublin, Ireland, back in the 70s. They had sort of run down, decrepit tennis courts, but they weren't too bad, but they were just there at the weekends. They'd lock them up. They wouldn't use them. They were only to be used during school time. And we lived in a suburban area of Dublin. So I went to the headmaster and I said, could I use the courts to do lessons? And he said, well, yeah, sure. Can you play tennis? And I went, no, but I'll learn. So then I got my dad to give me some pay for some lessons. I did crash courses on tennis, and then I opened up a tennis school at the weekend and charged kids to come in and train, and paid for my I can't remember what I bought that year, but it was something cool, and saved my first 500 punt, I think it was at the time. So then my dad knew, right, okay, he's going to be doing crazy stuff later on.
I love it. That's the greatest story, and that's why I wanted to make sure that we ended on that. Derek, before we sign off, how can we find out more about you? How can we connect?
Derek O'Carroll at brightpearl.com is the way to drop me a note. And then as a company, I'm on LinkedIn. You'll find me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and all the usual channels. But you can just reach out direct.
Very cool. We'll link all that up on the show notes. We really appreciate you coming on, sharing your wisdom, your background, your story, and this experience as a tennis professional or tennis coach. Loved it, Derek. Thank you for being this week's Modern Leadership Guest Expert.
Cheers, man.
How do you not love that story of going to the headmaster, asking if you can use the tennis courts, taking a crash course in tennis, and then with the confidence or the audacity to go out there and teach young people the game of tennis? I love that mindset. I would love to cultivate that kind of mindset in my kids. And that's part of the reason why we have this podcast, because I want to hear these stories. I want to bring people together that view the world just a little bit differently than either I did or I do. And hopefully I've done the same for you. Of course, everything that we talked about in this episode, including links to the book, The Superpower of the Quote, can be found at jakeacarlson.com/ML155, episode 155. Until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life. Remember, everything is figure-outable. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.